Center, Scott Ramsey, for providing all of those parking places for those of you who couldn't find a parking place close by, and Wayne Purcell and the River's Edge Golf Course, same thing, for providing more auxiliary parking. Thank you. And as always, a lot of appreciation to all of you who sponsored tables, who sponsored this event, and who sponsor the Chamber of Commerce and the work that we do. Thank you very much. So I would like to start, before I introduce the speaker here, everyone in the room who is an elected official, could you please stand so we can recognize you for your service? I know there are a few. Thank you. Thanks for coming this morning. And a little bit of job security for me here. Board of Directors for the Bend Chamber of Commerce, could you please stand? Be recognized. Thanks for your service. All right. So, one thing before we start the program. We have a little project going on. We're collaborating with Opportunity Knox. Those of you who know Jim Shell and some of the folks that are out there, there is a book in the works. And the book is about doing business in Bend and what makes it so special. Now, the Chamber of Commerce sends out a couple of thousand, I believe, relocation packets. We collaborate with Visit Bend, with the City of Bend, and others to make sure that folks who are trying to open a business here or move here from work are connected to the business community. So this book and a primer, or more of a guidebook, will go along with it, and this is where you come in. So many of you are realtors, so many of you are the first people that see some of these folks that come into town. So our question of you this morning, for the next couple of months, we're going to be reaching out to the business community and for those interacting with new folks in town on what you think we should be telling new businesses and new workers in Bend about doing business here. And there's a couple of ways that you can get to us. Now, let me give you a couple of suggestions. A lot of folks think we're one of the most collaborative business communities around. That's why, second year in a row, we were voted the best small city to do business in the United States. A lot of folks think it's the work-life balance, it's about being friendly, it's about being innovative and competitive. So tell us what you think we should be telling new folks coming to town. And two ways to do it. Hashtag BendBiz, right up there on your screen. Or you can email us at the Bend Chamber at info@bendchamber.org. We'd really appreciate your thoughts on what you think we should be telling new businesses as a guideline. Okay, now moving on. Next page. I have the honor of introducing Tia Lewis from Schwabe, our sponsors today. So Tia graduated cum laude with certificate in Environmental and Natural Resources Law from Lewis and Clark School of Law. She's practiced law in Central Oregon for 25 years, so since she was 3, it's pretty awesome, and focusing on areas related to real estate and land use. And she does a lot of speaking engagements and is sought after for her expertise in this area. She was recently elected at the as the Region 1 representative to the House of Delegates to the Oregon State Bar. She's a member of the Oregon Board of Directors for the Deschutes Children Foundation, and an active member in the Rotary Club of Bend, and a board member at EDCO, Economic Development Central Oregon. Please help me welcome Tia to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you guys all for being here. I think we have record numbers, and it looks like from the parking lot we each drove our own car, so maybe we'll try to do a little better on that this year, but it's great to see everybody here. As Katie mentioned, I am a shareholder in the Bend office of Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt, and this is our 8th year as the title sponsor of this event. We're really honored every year to partner with the Chamber and bring this event to the community and be a part of the discussion about real estate and land use in our community. I don't often use these sponsorship opportunities to talk much about Schwabe because we're all really here to talk about real estate, but there are a couple of things that I want to talk to you about just briefly this morning. The first thing is, we apologize that we don't have any notepads or pens on your tables, but they got held up with the snow, so they're somewhere lost in the UPS system. And instead, we're going to do a raffle. So there's a little bowl sitting back. Jamie she's waving it, and it's back near the juice. Please put your business card in it, or if you didn't bring a business card with you, just put your name and some contact information on the paper, and we're going to raffle a Kindle Fire. And so we'll choose the winner at the end, and we'll contact you whether it's an email or phone number on your card. So the second thing I want to talk to you about just briefly is Schwabe's been in the news a little bit lately for some innovative things that we've been doing. We have a brand new CEO. Her name is Graciela Calver. This is actually our first CEO. We reorganized our practice this year to have a CEO. And Graciela is a fantastic lady. She was born and raised in Tijuana, Mexico. She's an electrical engineer and a patent lawyer and a great leader. She comes to Bend frequently when Schwabe sponsors events, so if any of you have had the chance to meet her, you will know what I mean about just being a phenomenal person, and if you haven't had the chance, I hope that you will in the future. The second thing is we've added a new member to our real estate and construction industry group. Mike Robinson from Perkins Coie has joined Schwabe. And many of the people in the Bend community know Mike. He has quite a few clients here and has been active in the real estate and land use practice in Bend. So we're very happy to have him join us. And then lastly, I just wanted to let you know, we have reorganized our practice into industry sector groups. And so we now serve 6 industry sectors. And we believe that this is a way to better serve our clients, to immerse ourselves into the industries that our clients' businesses and that our lawyers serve. And so check us out on the web and take a look at our new organizational structure. We're hoping that this enables us to better serve our clients. And it's with that philosophy that allows us to sponsor and be a part of events like this and really engage in the dialogue of the community about the industry. So with that, let's get to the keynote speaker. We have 2 really great speakers that we're excited to bring to you today. The first is Dr. Paul Bishop. He's the Vice President for Research at the National Association of Realtors. Dr. Bishop leads a team of economists and analysts in the area of survey research and policy analysis. The research group publishes several comprehensive member and consumer surveys each year, conducts policy-oriented analysis to support association advocacy initiatives, and tracks market activity with the publication of existing home sales and data each month. Dr. Bishop will be followed by Lorelei Juntinen. Lorelei is a partner and project director for Eco Northwest, specializing in the evaluation of the intersection between public investment and community development. Her recent projects have identified creative approaches to investment in redevelopment and affordable housing for local governments. So please help me welcome Dr. Bishop.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is my first time to be in Bend, so I'm looking forward to spending a little time here and had an opportunity to talk with a number of you. And so, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. As you can tell from the introduction, I guess the best way to sum up my role and our group's role in the National Association of Realtors is we're the data geeks. So we monitor the data that comes in terms of creating existing home sales, we monitor the economy, and all of those drivers that affect how the real estate market outlook comes out and plays out over the next, say, 12 to 18 months. So what I want to do in the next several minutes that I have here is give you our perspective on the real estate market. So this is largely the national perspective, but I think it's also important to understand the national perspective, since when it comes to policy making, what policymakers in Washington see and the regulators in Washington see, they're focusing on the national real estate perspective. And we all know, of course, it varies a lot from one community to the next, but I also think it's worthwhile to think about what the regulators and those that are concerned about the nature of the market on a national level are looking at. And the second thing is, most consumers out there get their messages about the real estate market at a national level. They may hear that home prices are up by such and such amount, that existing home sales are up and down, but of course, that's not what's necessarily going on in the local community. So I think it's worthwhile having a sense of what consumers are hearing versus what may actually be happening on the ground. And that's where all of you come in when you're working with clients. So to get started here, there's a number of slides here, and I'll go through them relatively quickly, but just for your benefit, these slides are going to be available, I believe, on the Ben Chamber website, and also there's a link at the end where you can download them. So rest assured you can have these slides and use them in whatever way you would like, pass them along to your colleagues or peers, or make use of them however you like. So to get started though, there's a few things we want to cover today. And all of this is driving toward our view of the real estate market and what is both driving it and some of the impediments in the market that we see right now. So we're going to start first at a very basic level, because this is something that people often forget, and especially policymakers, not so much at the local level because they see what's going on in their community, but certainly at the national level, is just what the economic contribution of real estate is to the economy, both at the local level and at an individual level. A couple words about what we see are driving the economy and driving housing markets, some data about market conditions, and then finally some of the challenges and opportunities that we see in the real estate market. And hopefully that's a good basis for some Q&A later in the program. So in terms of what the contribution of housing is to the economy, one number that's been pretty consistent now for quite some time when we look at the data is real estate overall, so this includes both residential and commercial, accounts for almost 20% of the national economy. So when you think about that, 1 out of every $5 is somehow connected to the real estate market. That's pretty significant. There are very few other industries that can come close to that. But that's kind of a vague number at the national level. It's important. But when you drill down at the individual level, here's some data that the Federal Reserve publishes every 3 years. And it's the median household wealth of renters versus homeowners. And on the left, you have renters. No, that's not a mistake. It's $5,200 is the median household wealth among renters. And for homeowners, it's $231,000. So there's a huge difference there that we see in terms of the household wealth. Some of that, of course, is related to the fact that if you own a home, you've no doubt built up some equity. But I think there's a lot of other things under the hood there, if you will, that allow homeowners to build up equity, build up wealth more quickly than renters do. So certainly at an individual level, it's very important. And what about at a community level? So one of the things that we've done for all 50 states, this is the data for Oregon, is we tried to estimate what is the impact of a real estate sale. So we're not talking about the dollar value of the transaction, but all of those other things that go along with the real estate transaction. And so for our estimate for Oregon, you can see the numbers there, about $25,000 for a median-priced home for all of the real estate-related activities. You know, new homeowners often buy furniture, remodeling, refurbishing, on average, a little less than $5,000. All of that gets turned around in the economy and spent over and over again. And then, with all of that growth, there's additional real estate activity over and above that. So our estimate is one home sale transaction in Oregon generates an additional $80,000 in income for the community. That's pretty significant. So that really tells you the impact at the community level that we're talking about. And this is, I think, drives home the point even more, and we'll get back to this a little bit later. We know the value of home ownership at a personal level, at a community level, but at the same time we're seeing the home ownership rate at its near generational low. So that's why we're concerned about the home ownership rate. It's not necessarily defending whether or not we should be a renter nation or not, but it's that connection with wealth that's pretty important. And those that are having the most difficult time jumping on that first rung of the home ownership ladder, of course, are the young people. And so you can see the comparison between the home ownership rate among those 34 and younger at the peak versus what it is now in other age groups. Younger people are less likely to own a home. We'll come back to that as one of the challenges. But I think that's a basis for why we like to look at the contribution of real estate to the economy. It's not just a vague number, 20% of GDP. It really has strong implications at the individual community level. So with that, what are some of the things that we see from an economic perspective are driving the real estate market at this point? There's really three things: jobs, people, and income. And We could spend a lot of time on the economy and talk about what's moving the economy forward or backward, the concerns and risks that might be there, but this is a pretty good snapshot. If any of you were living in this community during the financial crisis, you can recognize that the unemployment rate was sky high at that point. In fact, when I put this chart together, I thought there must be a mistake. It couldn't have been 16%, but in fact it was. And similarly, very high overall in Oregon as well. Obviously, things have come down quite a bit since then, and from talking with everyone that I had a chance to speak with before we got started here, everything seems to be firing on all cylinders in terms of the economy locally, and you can see that tremendous improvement in terms of the unemployment rate. What is one of those things that are driving it? No doubt it's the fact there are a lot of people moving to the area. And if you look at this in pieces, you can kind of see what's going on. Again, this is information at the state level. There's 3 or 4 components we like to look at in terms of people moving to a community or why population grows and why there's more households. And one of them is natural increase. So how many births are there more than deaths in any year? It's just a natural increase. And in Oregon, it's about 10,000 or so every year, pretty consistent. Then there's people moving into the state from elsewhere. So I think this dovetails very nicely with what everyone has seen. 2012-13, yes, a few people were moving into the state, but really in 2014, 15, and 16, and even into 2017, a lot of people moving from elsewhere into the state. Now, I don't have information to show you for other states, but there are a lot of states where that green bar is actually negative. People are moving out en masse from states to other parts of the country. The final thing is people moving in from abroad. Pretty consistent, but it's clearly the people moving in from other parts of the United States that is driving it. And so over that period from 2012 to 17, about 277,000 people have moved into the state. If you look at the data for Bend, it's about 21,000 people over that time period, and 90% of that increase was due to people moving in from elsewhere. So again, I think that dovetails nicely with what everyone is seeing. The data bear that out. So what about the third leg of the stool here in terms of the economy, in terms of income? Again, statewide numbers here, but this probably tells a similar picture, a similar story what we see locally. That's the trend in terms of national income per capita, taking out inflation. So we put this on an index level so we can compare. Nice steady increase since 2009, about a 15 or 16% increase in income. For Oregon, pretty consistent until the last couple of years. So the fact that people are moving into the state, generating a lot of economic activity, higher income on a per capita basis. So again, the economy is moving forward very strongly in a number of ways, driven by jobs, people moving into the area, and income. So it doesn't take too much imagination to think that that's going to have an impact on the housing market either. So what do some of the housing numbers say? And again, looking at it from a national perspective, to start, and I think much of what we see at a national level applies very much to what's going on locally, maybe to a certain degree in different intensity, but virtually wherever I go, the story is very similar to what we're seeing at the national level. But before we dive into too much of the data, it's worthwhile asking the average consumer out there what they think about housing. Is it a good financial decision? This is based on some information we collect every month through a telephone survey, and we ask consumers a number of questions. It's both homeowners and renters. Not necessarily people in the market to buy today, but just representative of both homeowners and renters across the nation. And we ask, do you think housing is a good financial decision? Owning a home and buying a home is a good financial decision? Now, it wouldn't be surprising after everything we've seen over the last several years that there might be some skepticism. But in fact, something approaching 80% of all households in the U.S., based on our survey, think buying a home is a good financial decision. And it's pretty much that way across the board, various subgroups. In terms of urban, suburban, rural residents, very strong. Different age groups, even the millennials are very much aware that buying a home is a good financial decision, and across income groups. So no matter how you slice the data, basically there is still very much a sense that buying a home is a good financial decision. But there are some things we have to be aware of course. And the economy is strong, jobs are growing, both locally and at the national level. But what have we seen over the last several weeks in terms of some of the concerns about whether or not to buy a home today versus waiting? And of course, mortgage rates are one of those key factors. They've risen pretty sharply over the last few weeks, and certainly since the start of the year. And without digressing too far into policy and so forth, there's a couple things going on here. One is that the markets are scared of inflation at this point. There's been a few indicators that inflation might be ticking up. And so what is the Fed going to do to try to get ahead of it? They're going to raise rates. And while the Fed doesn't control mortgage rates in any sense, what they do filters through the rest of the financial markets. If the Fed decides to raise the rate that they control, the federal funds rate, that sends a signal to the rest of the financial markets that, in fact, the economy seems to be doing pretty well. Inflation might be a concern going forward, and so as a result, interest rates across the board tend to increase, including mortgage rates. So while the increase isn't alarming at this point, it certainly is something that has got people's attention. So from a perspective of a buyer, of course, that's a concern. But of course, when you do the calculations of 50 basis point increase in the mortgage rate, yes, it costs a little bit more, but it may not be as startling in terms of the actual dollars as it does looking at how much the rates themselves have increased. So that's kind of out there. That's something that's unsettled at this point in terms of what's going to happen next. It suggests, all the people who follow the Fed and the financial market suggest that the Fed will probably raise interest rates 3 times this year. So certainly we're not going to be in a position where mortgage rates decline in any meaningful way, but the open question is how much they might increase going forward. And that increase in the cost of buying a home through the financing, the mortgage rate, when you pair it with the fact that we have a very lean supply of homes on the market, and this again is national data, so the month's supply of homes on the market. So in any given month, how long would it take to exhaust the entire supply of homes on the market available for sale? And since early 2012, it's been under 6. And 6 is kind of the benchmark that we say for a balanced market. The latest data as of December was 3.2 months nationally, and we just released the January data yesterday, and it was 3.4, so still very lean. And there's very little indication that's going to turn around in any meaningful way in the near term, for lots of reasons, some of which we'll discuss in a minute. But this is really pretty unprecedented when you think that in 2008, 2009, we were looking at double or even triple the number of months supply in the market. I'm willing to bet, had I been here in 2008 and said, in a few years we'll be talking about a housing shortage, there would have been a lot of grins and grimaces, what's that guy talking about? But in fact, that's what we're seeing at this point. This is a little bit of data from the MLS in terms of months supply locally, number of areas defined by the MLS. And there's a lot of information here. The blue bars are what the month supply was in 2012, just kind of taking a longer term perspective. The red are what they are today. And in virtually every case, it's lower today than it was, and significantly so. There's virtually no areas that are in the kind of 6 month range, many in the 2 to 3 month range. So again, what we're seeing at the national level, happening locally, even more so in this case. So what does that mean for the overall level of sales? We have too few homes on the market to satisfy all the demand out there. So it's actually putting a lid on the number of sales we see overall. You can see the trend over the last several years, and given all the economic growth that we've seen over the last few years, you might expect that number to be even bigger in terms of the number of sales each year. But in fact, it's been pretty flat over the last few years. And in fact, as I said, we released January existing home sales data yesterday, and it actually fell 4% in January. Again, not because people want to move out of the market or somehow scared about real estate, they just couldn't find a home to buy. So in fact, existing home sales fell last month, and you may have seen that in the news. You have the news reports yesterday. So how do we get out of this box? Well, one of the ways, of course, is we need to build more homes. Sometimes when we talk with the media will say, well, sellers just need to put their home on the market. Well, most sellers are also buyers. So on net, in terms of the data we're looking at, that doesn't improve the situation at all. So on the panel here on the left is single family starts at the national level. The green line is what was historically the average, kind of before the bubble, kind of the calm period in the housing market, building about 1.4 million homes per year. And you don't have to stare at that chart too long to realize we're way below the green line. And we're building maybe 1 million homes, 800,000 in 2017. So 800,000, 1.4 million. That's a huge gap in any given year, but at the same time, there's been a large gap for the last several years. So it's not just a matter of hoping we build 1.4 million homes next year, which we won't, but we have a huge backlog of demand sitting out there from homes that weren't built since about 2010. So that's the main reason that we're seeing this tight inventory situation, and one of the reasons that it's not going to turn around quickly. On the multifamily side, of course, it's a different picture. Financing is a whole different ballgame. In the multifamily side, there's strong demand among renters for apartments and multifamily units, and basically we're back to where we were. In fact, there's even some concern in markets about overbuilding at this point. So it's really the single-family side building too few homes. And when you talk to builders, and some of you probably know this firsthand, the reasons that the builders say they can't build more homes: lack of skilled labor. The skilled labor that was in the industry 6 and 8 years ago certainly moved on. Masons, drywall, carpenters, so on and so forth. The regulatory process is always difficult, but it's gotten longer in terms of the time it takes to get approvals, as well as more costly. Building material costs have increased, along with a lot of other things we've seen as the economy's expanded. Lack of buildable lots in a number of communities. So all of these are headwinds on the building side that can't be reversed in any quick way by changing policy or tweaking with anything on the margins that policymakers have control over. So it's going to be a long slog to get us back to where we need to be to satisfy all of that demand that we missed over the last several years. So what does that mean in terms of prices? Well, again, think back to Economics 101. Strong demand, limited supply, prices are increasing, and in fact they've been increasing now for the last several years, about 6% a year. So the real squeeze comes in. How many people have seen their income, or maybe your children's income, their wages increase by 6% a year over the last several years? Very few. So home prices increasing 6% a year, wages 2 or 3%. That wedge keeps getting wider and wider, especially for renters who have an even tough time coming down with the down payment. So how does this community and other communities in Oregon compare with some other large communities in terms of price increases? Here's some, you may not be able to see it from a distance, but large metro areas, data that we collect on a quarterly basis. In the far left, on a year-ago basis, is Seattle, increasing in the low teens on a year-over-year basis in terms of median home prices. And the red bars are several communities in Oregon: Salem, Eugene, Bend, Portland, all of them above the national average. Again, consistent with what I'm sure everyone here in the room is seeing locally. Again, it's not a local issue only, it's statewide, and it also reflects what's going on nationally very clearly. Again, drilling down a little bit more to the local level, again, based on MLS data for various communities and various areas locally. Again, U.S., between 2012 and 2017, home prices increased by about 40%. In virtually every other area locally, it's been far above that. Some cases more than doubling. The one exception is higher cost areas. The increase was significant in terms of dollars, but in terms of percentages, a little less. But again, significant increase in prices as a result of all of those factors we've been discussing in terms of tight market as well as increasing demand. So what are some of the challenges we see? We've already touched on a few of them. One, of course, is with respect to the first-time buyers. So if you work with first-time buyers, of course, it's always the case that coming up with a down payment is a difficult task. That's always been a factor that has been a challenge for first-time buyers. But in data that we collect of recent home buyers, we survey home buyers and sellers every year, we asked what is among the most difficult challenges you face? And about 25% said coming up with a down payment is the most difficult. It's not the only hurdle, but it's the most difficult challenge I as a first-time buyer faced. And these are successful home buyers who ultimately completed the purchase of a home. And what is some of the reasons that it's difficult? One of those, and that's on the far left, that big orange bar, 50% of those who said it was difficult, student loan debt was the main concern. And it's some work that we had done about a year or so ago. We worked with an organization that has a lot of information about student loan debt and student loan borrowers. And when we looked at the data among student loan borrowers who had completed an education, were paying back as scheduled, the best estimate is it delayed their home purchase by about 5 years, the weight of the student loan debt. So it's significant for some. It's not just the headlines that you see where such and such student has $100,000 in student loan debt. The median is about 30 now, but as a first-time buyer, you can imagine with all the other expenses of establishing yourself after school, buying a car and so on and so forth, an additional $30,000 for most is a pretty significant limitation on their ability to save. So among renters, though, we say, we might think, well, maybe just owning a home is too difficult. Maybe it's not something for me. Some of the headlines say, well, millennials want to live downtown within steps of a Starbucks, and that image that we get when we read some of the stories in the press. But we did ask among renters, do you ever want to own a home? Maybe it isn't something you can do today for various financial reasons or lifestyle reasons, but do you ever want to own a home? And I think this is an opportunity, and it's some good news to take with you. In my mind, it wouldn't be surprising if this number had been much lower. But in fact, 80% of renters, or almost 80% of renters, said, I want to own a home in the future. Maybe not this year or next year, but that's a life goal I have. So very positive in the sense that, as I said, I wouldn't have been surprised had that number been much lower than it is. But in fact, 8 in 10 renters say they want to buy a home in the future. So the next obvious question is, if you don't own a home today, what is holding you back? Not surprising, among this group of renters who wants to buy a home at some point in the future, over a third said, I can't afford to buy one right now. Home prices are high, I've got difficulty for saving for a down payment. Certainly there's about a third who, it's just not the right time for me to buy a home. Life circumstances are such, I'm not established in my career, I may be moving, those kinds of factors. That's understandable. And some people just need the flexibility of being a renter. But once we asked also among this group of renters, how difficult would you think it would be for you to get a mortgage? Knowing your own financial position, how difficult would it be? And again, this is based on messages that renters are getting, from friends who have tried to purchase a home, family, through social media, all of those kinds of messages that we hear every day. And over half, in fact 56%, said it would be very difficult for me to get a mortgage. Now, whether or not 56% could not get a mortgage is something completely different than the perception that it would be difficult to get a mortgage, because in some other work we did, a very large percentage of renters thinking about buying a home said, I know I need at least 20% down. That's the benchmark that they have in their mind. I can't even think about buying a home until I have 20% down. Well, of course, if you have 20% down as a first-time buyer, that's great, but very few first-time buyers are in that position. And of course, we know it's not necessarily the case that you need 20% down. So there might be a perception issue there that it's actually more difficult to buy a home and come up with a down payment and financing than it actually is. That may be holding back some renters at this point. So how does this shake out in terms of the dynamics of the market going forward? For a number of years before the financial crisis, about 40% of existing homes were sold to first-time buyers. It would be up a percentage point or down from year to year, but 40% was kind of the benchmark. So you can see from this slide here that it's been hanging around the 30% mark now for quite some time. Now, part of that is, of course, when it comes to actually going into the market as a first-time buyer, prices are rising, limited inventory, so those are the factors that are holding back the market. But if we think about what we saw in the very first slide about the wealth building benefits of being a homeowner, there was a certain percentage of first-time buyers who are not in the market who may be left out of that going forward. So that's one of the challenges we see going forward. And again, it is not anything that we see can be fixed with policy change or anything like that, but it is something to monitor. So again, when you're talking with potential buyers, first-time buyers in particular, these are some of the factors that no doubt are weighing on their mind. So, as we wind up this discussion here, here's probably the slide that has the best data points on it I can imagine. And again, this is based on a survey we do of households each month. And we asked this very simple, straightforward question: is homeownership part of your American dream? And we didn't define what American dream is. We just, in the minds of the people who respond to this question, we said, is homeownership part of your American dream? And as you can see, a vast majority, represented by the green, said yes. And even more importantly, this is not kind of a casual observation of, well, if I can buy a home at some point in the future, I will. It could be kind of nice. No. Over 80% of that group said it's something that I strongly agree with. It's a strongly held belief that I want, that homeownership is part of my American dream. So it's a large percentage of homeowners view homeownership as part of their American dream, and it's a very strongly held belief. So I think that's a very good basis for going forward, especially as we confront some of these challenges in terms of the market today. But the market today won't always be what it is today 4, 5, 6 years into the future, of course. A lot of things can change over the interim. So I think that's a very good basis, especially in the environment that we've been in over the last several years, that, again, the vast majorities of people we ask still think homeownership is part of their American dream. So, as I conclude here, what should you plan for in 2018? And it's not very satisfying to say kind of more of the same, but in fact, it is largely more of the same. So in terms of the economy, we don't anticipate any significant changes. I mean, things will continue to move forward. The unemployment rate is relatively low. There may be some changes in terms of interest rates and the view of inflation and how the Fed responds to those kinds of things. We had a few inflation scares over the last few months. That certainly has brought everyone's attention to focus more on inflation after years and years of not having to worry about it. But at the same time, as the economy continues to grow, the economy overall can tolerate a little bit higher interest rates both generally in terms of economy-wide interest rates as well as specific to the mortgage market as well. And sad to say, I don't think there's any immediate change in terms of the inventory situation. For all of those reasons we mentioned, none of those that I can see are something that we can turn around real quickly. So to the extent that there's an opportunity to support more building activity in the community, to address the concerns of first-time buyers and those that want to move into the community and still keep home prices at a reasonable level, I think that's something to focus on not only in 2018 but also beyond 2018 as well. And of course, prices are going to continue to increase if in fact the inventory situation is as tight as it appears. But I think taking away the main point here in terms of building on the future is consumers, whether you're a homeowner today or want to be a homeowner in the future, are still relatively optimistic about the value of owning a home. Despite what some of the headlines we occasionally see in the press about people turning away from home ownership, are millennials going to buy homes? Every bit of information that we've been able to gather suggests that they want to buy homes in the future. It's just the current market conditions that are preventing them or slowing them down from being able to do that. So I think that's the message to build on at this point. For those of you who love numbers, there's a forecast of the specific forecast for our existing home sales as well as prices. And in fact, if you want to download this presentation, there's a link there. It will also be on the Bend Chamber website. So I will leave you with that, and hopefully we can follow up with a little Q&A later in the program. But I think, as I said, that's our perspective from a national level. It probably syncs very closely with what you're seeing locally, and it's very consistent with what we're seeing in a lot of other communities as well, that it's largely a story of too few homes, rising prices, and some impediments and concerns about going forward, especially with regard to first-time buyers. So, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Lorelei Junton. She is a partner and project director from Eco Northwest. She specializes in the evaluation of the intersection between public investment and community development. Please welcome Lorelei.
Where's that voice coming from? That was so awesome. Hi everybody, thank you for having me here today. My name is Lorelei Junton. I am a partner at Eco Northwest. We are a Portland-based economics consulting firm. And I'm here to reiterate most of what you just heard, but tie it to the local context. I have two main objectives today. The first is to introduce a new report, which you all have on your tables. We are excited to be partnering with the Central Oregon Association of Realtors to use their data set and produce some reports that will be moving forward on an ongoing basis that can help you to make sense of the market. So I'm going to do a quick little overview of that. And then my second objective is to highlight some of the interesting things that we found as we were digging into the data. So starting with point number one, here's just a quick snapshot of the report. It has multiple components. The first is that it's going to provide a regional overview, and then it digs into each of the submarkets. And this is something that you can expect to be coming out on a quarterly basis with updated information in it. We've spent some time with our spatial analysts turning some of the sales and other data into maps to help you to understand the geographic diversity in the market. And coming soon, but not quite ready yet, we're going to be producing a price index. If you're familiar with Case-Shiller's or some of those other indices, we're going to be producing one specific to the Bend market that will be pulling together all of the different indicators of market strength into one place so that you can have a very quick snapshot on how things are performing. Have not quite gotten to that piece of it yet. This first report covers an entire year's worth of data and has some trending information going back as well. From here forward, they'll be available on a quarterly basis. They cover all the things you'd expect them to cover, typical stuff: sales volume, days on market, listing price, financing source, but also includes some maps. And what we're showing here are aggregated sales on a 5 square mile basis, averaged out so that you can see geographically where you've got the highest sales prices and where you might have lower sales prices. One point that I do want to make just real clear as you're looking at these numbers for the first time, we pulled out average sales price, and I think you all are used to looking at median, so I don't want you to be confused at how come the number is so much higher. It's higher because you've had a lot of sales at the high end of the market, which has pulled the average off relative to the median. So just be aware of that if you're confused about that number being different from what you're used to looking at. This will be available, it's available now if you wanted to go to CORE and download it in a PDF so that you can share it with all of your friends. It also will be distributed via email to all CORE members on a quarterly basis. So that's my first objective, new report out there, have fun with that. My second objective is to try to give you some information about what the report actually says. And I have to admit, I was racking my brain trying to come up with a way to make it interesting, because as you just heard, the market holds steady and very strong, and that's pretty much what's happening across the board. Inventory continues to be tight, and I'm pretty much done telling you what's going on right there. So to try to make it a little bit more interesting, I am breaking all of the rules of presentation, so please bear with me, because not only am I going to make you talk to each other and try to do something fun, but I'm going to try to test some technology at the same time. I have an interactive piece of software that lets you vote on the answers to the questions I'm going to bring forward. And there's absolutely no reason that it shouldn't work, except that there are so many of you here that it might overwhelm the system. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed. And if it works, I'm going to be really happy. And if it doesn't, we're all going to be sad, and I'm going to write an angry letter to pull everywhere. And we're just going to pretend like it's 1998 and we don't know what the internet is. And you can write down your answers. There are prizes. There are prizes. So we'll come back to that at the end. So I need you guys to pick one person, only one, at each table who has a smartphone, and go to that website. One person, only one person. Only 50 teams get to submit answers, and I did that on purpose to try to limit the chaos and also to make you act fast. Here's the address bigger. This should be really easy from here. You gotta make a team name, be as creative as you want to. Just name it by the number of your table if you can't come up with anything fun. This is really dangerous. Not only did I ask you to talk to each other, but I asked you to get out your smartphones. It's all over from here. You're never going to be able to keep your attention. Okay, you should be done with that. Everyone done with that? I don't hear anyone yelling. Okay. Okay, everyone stop talking. You're done. All right, this is going to be our test question. We're going to see if this works. And everyone keep our fingers crossed that it works. Our table is mostly composed of, who are you? Real estate agents, developers or builders, bankers, public sector folks, jokers.
There's no city managers on that list.
Is it working? It doesn't seem like it's working. Yes! Yay! And we do have at least a couple jokers in the group. Okay, I want to point out that we have a timer down here. That's also on purpose because you guys don't want me up here talking all day. This one is easy because it's the test question, but we will not allow any more than 1 minute on any particular question. Full and no longer accepting responses, mostly real estate agents. Bankers with a strong showing. I like it. Okay, here's the next question. So we heard a lot about the fact that many people are moving to Bend and to this region. Where are they coming from? Which county, from those who are moving from outside of the state, which county is the most common origin? Almost there, I can see. The mental math tells me we're almost done. What is that bottom one? The bottom one is Clark County, Washington, if you can't see it. Okay, it's done. Looks like you all expect a California invasion has been going on, mostly from Los Angeles. You're all correct, Los Angeles. Let's look at the actual data. So this is based on tax returns. So this is not representing actual individual people because you have married filing jointly and etc. But there were 184 tax returns that came in from Los Angeles County. And to look at it a little bit more specifically from a geographic perspective, what this is showing is the number of people moving into each county, so Deschutes, Crook, and Jefferson. And if we step outside of just looking at it from the county basis, but what region in the country did they come from? You can see the distribution. For Deschutes, almost the biggest chunk came from the west, excluding Oregon, so that's going to be California and Washington, not surprising given what we just saw a moment ago. But a surprising number of folks coming in from the Midwest and the South. Anyone in here move in from the Midwest or the South recently? Yeah. Excellent, welcome. Okay, next question. Lots of cash purchases going on. How many? What share? And this is in the whole region, the 3-county region, were cash buys in 2017.
That's a beat.
Don't stop working now. There it goes.
There you go.
So fun to watch while thinking. Okay, we're done. We're done. The poll is full and no longer accepting responses. You think it's 25%? Nationally, it's 22%. There it is. Very good. Let's look at the breakdown over time of the share of cash buys. It hit its peak around 2011-ish, and that's probably not too surprising. That was folks looking for a deal in a down market. But now the story's a little different. This graphic is a little dense to interpret, so let me help you with it. What it's showing is, looking at average prices, the percent difference per square foot between cash and all transactions. So if you're above the line, people who are buying their homes in cash transactions are paying more per square foot than people who are getting it through conventional financing. If you're below, it's the opposite. And so what this indicates to me, the fact that in 2017 we're back up above the line, people are paying more for cash. It's like, oh, you'd let me buy this home for $2? I'd happily pay you $2.10. That is an indication of the fact that they're using their cash offers to compete in a very, very tight market, which is not the pattern that you saw during the recession for obvious reasons. Okay, question number 4. We're going to try to dissect the difference in price between new construction and existing construction. New construction typically has a premium. In 2011, it was a 46% premium. What is it in 2017, specifically in Bend, not in the whole region?
I think it's 30.
All over the place. I love it. Okay, we're done. We didn't need this timer. You guys are so fast. No, we haven't taken anywhere near a whole minute on any of these. So we care about this because it is also an indicator of how tight the market is. If existing sales are close to new construction sales, it means that there's a lot of very tight supply and that people are willing to pay a premium even for existing development. 0.5%. That surprised me. I was surprised by that. Here, let's just take a look at it over time, at the price premium over time. And not surprisingly, it is much tighter now than it was during the recession. And I picked the 46% as the high point just to throw you off on the 0.5%, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, what do we have next? Question 5, we're gonna talk about sales volume. And we're looking at the difference between 2007 and 2017, so over the last decade, and talking specifically about Redmond. How many of you, are any of you from Redmond here? Okay, good, enough. How many more transactions happened in the Redmond submarket in 2017 than in 2007? You all think 852 is the answer in Redmond. Let's find out. You like my animation there? Just trying to wake everybody up a little bit. All right. We're going to do the same thing, but now we care about Bend. Not Redmond, but Bend. How many more transactions in 2007 than in 2017?
I think it's low.
All right, we did it. I should have set my timer at 30 seconds, because that's about how long it's taking. You all seem to think it's about 1,200. And you can see that Bend had the largest increase, and Redmond did pretty well as well. But increases in transaction volume across all markets over that time period, as you would expect. Okay, now we want to talk about sales price, and I picked median as opposed to average so you can't cheat. But also you don't have 2007 in front of you. So we're trying to understand which of these submarkets had the biggest difference in median sales price between 2007 and 2017. I forgot to put the slide forward, sorry. This one's a little bit of a trick question. Probably should have told you that before you put your answers in. You guys are not doing well on this one at all. Not at all. I'm afraid to tell you that nobody got this question right. Who's here from Sun River? Anyone? Yeah, only a few people. And the reason it's a trick question is that Sun River actually had a decrease in the median sales price. And it was the biggest change, and that's why it was a trick question, because it said the largest difference. I had to make sure that nobody got everything right. That would make your egos too big. So Sun River and Sisters both seeing declines between 2007 and 2017. Those of you who know the market well probably have a better understanding of why that would happen than I do, but I'm assuming it has to do with the fact that those are a lot of vacation homes, and the market for vacation homes has changed during that time period. Otherwise, we're seeing increases in median sales prices, which is not particularly surprising. That's why I had to do it as a quiz, because nothing here is particularly surprising, except the 0.5%. Just to break down the data for you a little bit and let you absorb it, here's how average sales prices, we're now looking at average, have changed by submarket. In Bend, have exceeded the 2007 peak. Crook County following a similar pattern. In Jefferson County also, but without quite the same gains. La Pine area, Redmond area, look at them all grouping together like that, just right along the same lines. And Sun River and Sisters, and you can see the decline in Sun River and in Sisters. All right, this is the last question, and you all might think that since I'm the person here from an economics consulting firm, I should be able to answer this question, and I'm sure it's going to come up in the Q&A, so I'm just trying to get in front of it a little bit. In reality, the way that most economists like to test where people think the market is going is by talking to people, because our perceptions do in fact drive what happens in the market. So I would like to hear from you all what you think is going to happen in 2018, whether it's going to continue to improve, remain stable, or cool or decline. There's no right answer on this one. There's no answer, there's no reveal, so. Okay, looks like most of you think that it's going to remain stable. That might be because that's what the national economist who spoke before me said was going to happen. Luckily for me, I happen to agree with that. I don't see any indication that the trends are going to change from the sort of underlying economic fundamentals, from the popularity of this region for people moving in, which is really what's driving demand for new housing. I don't see any reason to expect that those things would change, and that having it remain stable going forward would be what we would expect. But our future market reports, produced in partnership with CORE, will prove whether we are right or not as we continue to produce these on a quarterly basis. This is the last one. This is how we're going to figure out who gets the prizes. So it's an honor system, as you can tell. I can't go back and verify, but I can't do that real time. So we're going to leave it as an honor system. How many questions did your table get right? If anyone puts A, I'm going to know you're lying.
You just gotta stand up.
Okay, fantastic. So everybody who is in category B, all but one of them, those 5 tables, or anyone who just couldn't get your response in who would be in that area, will you raise your hands? Yeah, you guys are going to be our prize winners. So yay, congrats to you. Yes, applause for them. And I really also appreciate the honesty of everybody who is in E. I'm not going to make you raise your hands, but I love that you answered that way, so you can also be prize winners. Congratulations. The prizes are unfortunately not physically here. Ooh, the tech worked, but the lead up did not. So if you are willing to go by the Bend Chamber of Commerce office anytime after when can they do that? Where's
Anytime.
Anytime.
8 to 5.
Okay, anytime 8 to 5, starting tomorrow. There will be a prize there waiting for you, and they will be very happy to give it to you. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for playing along.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move into our local response panel. Will you please welcome to the stage Wendy Atkinson. Wendy has worked in the real estate industry in Central Oregon since 1985. Most of her career has been spent as a managing principal broker, a position she enjoys tremendously. Ladies and gentlemen, Wendy.
Let's hear it again for the doctor and Lorelei. Were they amazing? That was awesome. Thank you so much. And it was kind of nice to mix it up. I mean, as awesome as your presentation was, Dr. That's dry stuff, right? So it was good to have some fun too. So now you've heard from some regional and national experts, and we'd like to bring up a panel of your local experts who are going to give us some insight and some relativity to what you just heard. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Bill Kuhn from First Interstate Bank. Bill, please come up and join us. And Jay Lyons from Compass Commercial. Jeff Harris from Hayden Homes. And Molly Brundage from Total Property Resources. So you can see we selected a panel that's very diversified in their knowledge base of the different segments of our market. So we're going to give each of them a chance to speak to what they heard and what their perspective is on what's going on in the market today from those different takes. And then we'll have an opportunity to do some Q&A, and you can so start thinking about questions. We will have an opportunity for you to text questions, so I'm going to give you this number now, and I will give it to you again before we start the Q&A. If you have any questions that you think of during the presentation, 541-419-9344 is the number that you'll text your questions to. So I'm going to have a seat with you guys. And Bill, will you tell us from the banking perspective?
I would be happy to. I am amazed at the number of attendees in the room today. By a show of hands, I'm curious, how many of you in the room were actually here in 2010, the very same event? Wow, pretty impressive. I was also amazed that we've actually got 13 tables of bankers in the room. I don't think we had 13 tables of bankers in 2010. I'm going to focus my comments on the commercial sector. I've been a commercial banker in Bend since the early 2000s, and what the current market is being driven by is just like residential. It's high demand and historically low vacancy factors, and that's pretty much across all investment classes. Lease rates are up dramatically, but even with the rapid increase in lease rates, we haven't kept pace with land costs and probably more importantly, development costs. And so what's happened there is that it's very difficult for some of these projects to be feasible right now on a going forward basis. So a lot of investors are actually putting more equity into these projects than what we typically see. There is as some of the presenters have talked about, there's an extreme shortage of skilled labor in the area right now, which has also driven up development costs. Basically, I've talked to some general contractors and also developers in the area, and our labor component is actually higher in Bend than it is in Portland and Lima Valley. And so that's obviously skewed our development cost, and it's made some of these projects a little bit more difficult to actually develop. The rising rate environment will have an impact over time on the financial feasibility of some of these projects. And again, how we typically balance these things out on the commercial lending side is we typically see a little bit more equity in the project than we would typically see. There's actually, and I'm aware of a couple of projects in Bend right now that are simply not going forward because they're not economically feasible right now, and they're basically just waiting, they're on hold until things become a little bit more in balance, and certainly in a rising rate environment, that may take a little while to actually get to that point. What we're seeing right now with a lot of the new construction that's being built, there isn't a lot of speculative development going on right now, at least on investor projects. But on owner-occupied facilities, there's a demand for special use properties where the owner-developer needs some functionality in the building, and they're actually willing to pay a premium to get a building that really meets their needs. Basically the UGB expansion that we recently completed, I was pretty actively involved in one of the technical advisory committees in that process, and that was approved in last year. But that isn't going to mean that we're going to have shovel-ready land immediately. I mean, it's still going to be maybe a 2 to 3 year window before we see some of that land become available for development. So what that's going to mean is that we're going to continue to have constraints on land availability, both on the commercial and residential side, and that will keep prices up. And it's going to make it more difficult to continue to build out what we have available here in Bend. By the same token, we're seeing some of this demand being pushed into outlying areas, Redmond, Madras, Prineville, where there is land availability, it's shovel ready, and so the land component of the equation is going to be much more reasonable, although building costs are going to be comparable throughout the Tri-County area. A couple of other just brief comments. I know as we went through the UGB process, there's going to be a renewed focus on building up and increasing density, efficiency measures. There's some key economic areas within the UGB expansion that we're going to focus on for future development. And for that to happen, there's got to be a lot of collaboration between the city and the developer, a lot of the offsites that are going to be required to build out these special use areas. A lot of that's going to actually have to happen on the front end to make it feasible for a developer to take a chance on some of these properties. And certainly like in the central core area, in downtown kind of 3rd Street area, for a large-scale redevelopment project to come out of the ground there's got to be a lot of collaboration again between the city and probably a large-scale developer. Basically ensuring that property has the connectivity, the functionality, access to all the services that area is going to warrant. And so I think that's going to be very interesting over the next several years to see what, if any new development comes out of that area. And then my final comment is just, with the, and I'm not a tax expert by any means, but I'm curious about the 2018 tax code and the limitation on itemized deductions and what impact that might have on Oregon in general from an in-migration standpoint, because we are not the most tax favored state. Certainly our surrounding neighbors, Washington and Idaho, have much more favorable property tax and also income tax standpoint. So I think that will have an impact over time, but that remains to be seen.
So true. Thank you, Bill. So moving on, we're going to go through each of the panel members giving their perspective, and then we'll have some conversation about what each of us had to say. So Jay, will you tell us a little bit from the commercial side of things?
Yeah, so to... Is this on? No.
Hello, sound people.
Hello? Hello?
Keep in mind that it's really hard to get off.
I'll just try and speak loudly.
No,
It's on? Hello?
okay.
So to piggyback on what Bill said, the vacancy rates right now are incredibly low on the leasing side of things. Office and industrial are both below 4% in Bend. Retail is below 3%. So for tenants that are out in the market these days that maybe signed leases 5 years ago and were given significant amount of concessions in terms of free rent, tenant improvements, reduced lease rates, those no longer exist. And I think it's been quite an adjustment for tenants to say, well, what do you mean my rent has increased by 40%? Well, it's not your landlord trying to stick it to you or other landlords. It's just a function of where the market is at currently. There's so few options available for tenants when you narrow down what their search parameters truly are. As an example, in the retail submarkets, the most popular submarkets arguably are downtown in the Old Mill District. And between both submarkets, there's one space available currently. So I think that speaks to how limited the supply truly is. If you look at the surveys that are on your tables, West Side submarket has a vacancy rate of about 5.8%, but if you drill down in the numbers further, about 19,000 square feet of that is at the Box Factory, and based on how we do our survey, we don't count a space as being occupied until the tenant actually is occupying the space. So if you take spaces that are being negotiated or have already been leased out of that 19,000 square feet, there's only 1,600 available, which drops the West Side vacancy rate to about 2.2%. So again, the options are extremely limited, and like Bill touched on, we're just not seeing a lot of speculative development. You see cranes around town or construction going on, but a lot of that is owner-user driven. Companies that are expanding their footprint, hotels that are moving into the area, not a lot of developers out there just building speculative space and hoping to find tenants. There is some going on, and that will create a little bit more inventory, but not to the extent that vacancy rates are going to change substantially in the near term. On the seller side, it's more of the same. It's very heavy on the investor side and very limited supply. It's coaching buyers that they need to be ready to make an offer immediately. If they're in a 1031 exchange, they're at a significant disadvantage if their earnest money hasn't gone hard on the deal that they're selling, because there's just too much demand. If you were to roll out an investment property in a quality part of town right now, I guarantee you would get multiple offers on the property almost immediately. So it's folks that are moving here to town and they own a duplex in San Francisco. They sold that. They want to own a commercial investment here in town, or Portland or Seattle. I mean, you name the community. Bend is going to continue to be an attractive place, and I see rates continuing to rise as a result of the lack of inventory, and values continuing to rise as a result of the increasing lease rates.
Kind of basic economics, right?
Yeah.
So much demand and not enough supply.
Exactly.
Jay, thank you. Jeff, how about from the new construction perspective? What do you see happening out there?
Well, are we, am I live? Was this hot?
It is hot.
The supply constraints that Dr. Bishop talked about are really the core, at the core of residential construction, nationwide. By my math, that gap that we saw in the housing starts is really where we're driving this. We had a very small oversupply back during the boom prior to the financial crisis. That got chewed up very quickly, and as a country, we haven't started enough homes, and there was a more severe version of that in Central Oregon. The things that we watch might be interesting to you as home builders. Primarily, our saying is that jobs drive housing, and so we're watching job gains. And we look at the types of jobs, we look at the sectors where those jobs are being added, and then we pay very close attention to median income. And I'll give some examples, I think, later on of where median income ties directly to the affordability crisis that we have in Central Oregon. It's more dramatic than some of the other areas of the country. During the last run-up, as jobs were added in Central Oregon, right toward the point where the bubble burst, construction jobs were a larger part of new jobs than I guess it was out of proportion to the other jobs being added. So we've been paying very close attention to that for the last 3, 4, 5 years, because each of us is thinking, all right, when's it going to happen? Especially those of us who have been through, I have a lot of gray hair, and it's mostly due to home building. And what we're watching for is that same percentage. What sectors are growing? Construction is not even in the top 5 for the last few years' worth of job growth in Central Oregon, which we think is very encouraging. Keep an eye on that. The other thing we watch, of course, are permits. We actually track a ratio of added jobs to permits, so that we can see our permits. If you look historically, you can see jobs grew and permits grew faster. And that was that was one of the signs of the apocalypse, not the only thing. So keep an eye on that, so that we can stay, we hope, in front of it. Now, it was largely an internal problem that caused the last downturn. The last bubble was, first we had oversupply, and the second was we had a problem with financing. There was a little too easy to get loans. Everyone remember the ninja loan, no income, no job, no assets, and you could get a loan. Other than that, you were fine. And so we were kind of watching all the time. Are we close to the next bubble? And I think the difference that I'm seeing from the prior boom versus this time is, one, what we talked about several times, the supply issue that we have. We've underbuilt for a long time, and population has continued to grow. Households have continued to form, because that's what population does. The other thing that's different is the barriers to entry are significantly different. It was easier before, as a builder, to start homes, get a license, get bonded, get insured, borrow the money. We had dentists developing lots, and I have a good dentist, but I'm not sure that's a developer that should be in the market, right? It was easy for homeowners to get a loan. It was too easy, and we saw homeownership go probably a little too high in 05 and 06 as a percentage of households. And then, of course, acquisition development loans for building are difficult. And so some of those things, for lack of a better term, have been good for the business, because it's a little healthier now, I think, even though it constrains our ability to add houses. And then the labor part that Bill talked about is absolutely an issue in home building. We had people leave the industry for 8 to 10 years, and now we're adding folks back to the industry, but skilled trades in Oregon, in the state of Oregon, it's very hard to be an electrician, a plumber, or another licensed journeyman. A personal example for us is we hired a team member for our accounting department. Her husband had 20,000 hours as a journeyman in the state of Washington, and when they moved here, he couldn't get a job. And he knows more about wiring a house than you could imagine, and so he had to take a bunch of classes, take a test, and now he has a partial license in Oregon. If we're going to add labor, we have to be able to figure out how to make it okay to have been really good at this same job in another place and be able to get a license to do it here. And the last thing, before I let some of the air back into the room, is land costs are challenging. It's a gigantic portion of the total cost of doing business as a home builder, and a lot of it has to do with, again, it's a supply issue. We can't bring land on fast enough to meet the demand. In 2006, there were 3,200 lots put on the ground in Central Oregon. Last year it was 800 lots. And 3,200 was too much, 800 is too few. So how do we figure out the right amount so we can get lots just in time in today's environment?
Really
Okay, back to you, Wendy.
Thank you. Really interesting to hear all the different perspectives, isn't it? And so now on to Molly. Molly, you run a residential brokerage, so tell us what's happening on that front.
Yeah, thanks. We've heard it from everybody across the board this morning. We don't have enough houses, and the ones that we do, their prices are rising. So it's really creating a frenzied, fast-paced, competitive environment for all of us. We saw the home values increase roughly 10% over this time last year, with our median price hovering at that $410,000 mark. In Bend, the outlying areas, Redmond, Pineville, LaPine, they all had very healthy increases, 7 to 10% as well. And in the first 7 weeks of the new year, we haven't seen any slowdown at all from an activity standpoint. We're seeing homes stay on the market for less time than we have in the past couple years. Right now, we're at 109 days on the market. And remember that that includes the time you list it to the time you close. So typically, we have 30, 45 days in there for due diligence or financing. So things are moving very quickly. We're to the point where if a property's been sitting for 30 days, our buyers are saying, what's wrong with it? We're seeing on average the homes close at 98% of their asking price across the board. And as Dr. Bishop said this morning, a balanced market is about 6% of 6 months of inventory, excuse me. We have just roughly 2.5 here in Bend, or Central Oregon. And part of that inventory includes maybe some challenging properties that have lingered. Maybe they can't get financed. Maybe they have funky floor plans and they're waiting for a really small demographic of buyers. 30% of that is new construction, which could be at permit. It could be at framing. It could be a builder that has it on the market that's waiting for their buyer to come. So when you filter those things out, we really have a very, very shallow pool of inventory to choose from. So it's making it very, very competitive. In fact, last night I did a quick search. We have one home in Bend under $275,000. It's on Jasmine Place if you're interested. If you bump that up to $300,000, we have a whopping 10 more options. So you can see how our outlying properties are really performing well because people are, they have no options, so we're pushing them to those outside market, which creates a need for us as brokers to be really knowledgeable of what's happening in those outlying markets so we can speak to those buyers that we can't service here in Bend. I think we'll all agree it's those darn best of lists that's creating all of this. We top every best of list. I've seen best investing, best beer drinking town, best place to retire, best overall fitness, best multi-sport, best dog friendly, best small city for new business, fastest growing city, best overall vibe, and really just the best place to live, period. So it's no wonder that we have people that are flocking here, which is making our housing challenges not only for those trying to come here, but for those of us that are already here. We used to define our feeder markets as Portland, Seattle, and Bay Area. But I did a quick check with my colleagues this week on their last 2 deals, and we heard people from Texas, Alaska, Colorado, Seattle, Portland, Eugene, Virginia, New York, and definitely every corner of California now. We're seeing the vitality of those feeder markets not showing any sign of slowing down. The buyers are coming, they're bringing their jobs, their out-of-state wages, they're able to telecommute, so they're coming here to Bend because our market still represents a much better value than the markets that they're coming from. We're seeing those buyers purchasing months and even years in advance of actually moving here. They're trying to avoid the next 10% increase, and they're just trying to get a foothold here. We often hear that, like, I just want to buy something so that they've got something here when they're ready to move here. Having strong feeder markets coupled with our strong market is changing the elements of our deals for those of us that are on the ground, so to speak. We're seeing home sale contingencies, lease backs, multiple offers, over asking price offers within days of having something come on the market. The buyers are coming here first, finding their houses, and making offers because when they put their house on the market in, say, Seattle or Portland, they're getting full price cash, quick close offers, and so they want to have their home here first. So it's requiring a more strategic, more global approach to how we're servicing our clients. We've got to know what's happening in those feeder markets as well as our own, so that we can go to our sellers and say, hey, the things of the past that we haven't liked, home sale contingencies and whatnot, aren't maybe as scary, and they're going to be more realistic, and we have to educate them that those are now an everyday norm of our deal making, if you will. So the moving process, whether it's they're moving out of town here or we're servicing a client that lives here, has become much more strategic. We're gearing our clients up to be much more flexible and, buckle up and prepare for kind of a crazy ride.
Yes, it's been a crazy ride for a few years now, hasn't it? So I'm kind of hearing an underlying theme here, kind of a mix of the combination of the shortage of inventory and affordability pushing people into our outlying areas. And I love your term, Molly. You keep saying, kind of becoming more globalized. When I got in the industry, Bend agents were Bend agents, Redmond agents were Redmond agents. We didn't cross boundaries. But you have to know the entire market now. And part of what I love about Central Oregon is that there really is something here for everyone. You might not be able to afford Bend, but you maybe can afford Crook County or Jefferson County or one of the other outlying areas. But how do you all see between the shortage of inventory and the affordability factor, what does our Central Oregon community look like here in the future? Good question. So Jeff, can you speak a little bit to that affordability factor?
Yeah, I think I can. We, like I mentioned, we track median income to try to be able to. When you look at income distribution, the median income is obviously that's the best representative of the largest chunk of the population that would be able to buy. And as we have so much in-migration, what looks like a deal to someone from another market is already unaffordable here, and so that certainly affects pricing. So in January, we in Bend crested 60,000 as the median income, 60,404. My data source here for some of this is OregonProspector.com, which is a state agency website that provides a lot of good job data and other demographic information, which we recommend. Based on that, the rule of thumb at 30% of your household income for housing payment puts you at an affordable house price of $269, which is lower than the one house that is listed. And over the last 6 months, the Beacon report median income by month in Bend averages out to 406. So we'll call it 4 to 410 is that range. So we're only about $140,000 off, which is really close. And I think the challenge is how do we figure out how to make housing that is affordable, because everybody in this room has a job they do that we need to make money at in order to be able to do it, right? When you add all that up, plus the actual costs of the inputs, it's a very challenging, environment. And I think the closer we can pay attention to what is affordable, what would be affordable, allows us to make sure that we're making good decisions for the community as we move forward.
That's great insight. Thank you, Jeff. And I was wondering maybe if the two of you could speak to commercial in outlying areas, because we've heard, you spoke a little bit, Bill, to development, and Jada, just the lack of vacancy in Bend, but what do the outlying areas look like?
Well, if you look at, we only track industrial leasing in Redmond, but if you look at the vacancy rate in our latest quarterly report, it's on par with the industrial vacancy rate for Bend. So we have seen some spillover. There is a slight price differential, maybe 10 cents per square foot per month, where it's more attractive in Redmond than it is in Bend. But the options there are still limited as well. So we have seen some spillover to Redmond, and some tenants or companies that prefer Redmond because they service kind of the Tri-County area, and Redmond is centralized for them. But I think the market in Redmond is strong, and Prineville as well. We have a number of brokers that have completed a number of transactions in Prineville recently. So I think the market across the board is healthy, not just in Bend, but across kind of the Tri-County area.
All of Central Oregon, and what do we see in development? The people that are coming to you, Bill, and looking for loans, what are they talking about in the outlying areas?
Well, we're definitely seeing a move to some of these outlying areas with existing businesses here in Bend. They need to grow and basically can't afford to grow in place here. They're looking to Redmond with land availability and obviously lower cost structure there. The other big factor that we're looking at is just pure housing affordability in terms of our businesses, our local businesses' ability to grow and recruit new employees to the area. It's having a profound impact on companies' ability to grow in place. They're missing out on opportunities where they've got an employee kind of ready to move, and then they start looking into housing availability and they decide not to make the move. So it is having an impact in that area. Obviously, housing affordability is something that we're all dealing with right now, and it's not just here in Bend, but it's truly in the Tri-County area.
Wendy, we have lots of questions coming in, so we're going to go to some questions. And if you have a question in the audience, please raise your hand as well. We have some mics going around.
So, everybody got the phone number? Should I give it out again, or do we hesitate to do that? It's 541-419-9344. So if you have a question, you can text to that number. Let's start with the audience, and then we'll segue back and forth into the text messages. Anybody in the audience with a question, raise your hand high.
We have a question on the screen if we want to take that one first.
We'll do that. Yeah, and you want me to read that. How does land value affect the gap between the availability of single-family values, multifamily housing? Does it exceed the impacts of other factors? So how does land value affect the gap between the availability of single-family values? Anybody want to speak to that?
I'm certainly happy to. The average lot in 2017 in Bend cost $150,000. And so that plus a $25,000 permit where's my math here? You're already at $175,000 before you've decided what to build. Or rather, you've moved a teaspoon of dirt. And then, so I think it's very easy to get to the median house price just with your building costs in a lot of cases, because you have to pay the lenders and you need agency fees to be able to sell it, and then you have obviously your sticks and bricks. So I think the land shortage is a significant factor. It's probably number one land and then number two labor that are affecting the cost, which can have an impact in price for sure, because you're not going to build it for a loss.
Right, you've got the land and the development costs, and then you finally get to talk about actually building a house. So hopefully that helps. Other questions?
We've got another one coming up here.
I'm going to read this screen.
Pick it up.
My readers, eventually. You guys are really quiet. What's going on? Are you just overwhelmed with all this information?
Wendy, how is the UGB land that's coming in going to impact that? Where are we going to see a downward pressure once that land gets entitled and ready to go?
So the question is, how is the land that's been incorporated into the UGB going to impact those costs and future buildable land? And I think that both Bill and Jeff can speak to that. I feel like I'm standing in the middle of
Yeah, I might comment just briefly on that. I think literally the time involved in actually getting it to a permitted stage and having utilities available to actually develop these sites, it's going to be absorbed just like that. I really don't think it's going to have an impact on overall land values. I think the absorption rate and the fact that it's going to be kind of a measured absorption, because all of these properties aren't going to be available for development at the same time. That's my perspective on it.
Yeah, I feel like I have the same perspective in that I always feel like we're 5 years behind in bringing the land in, because it takes that 3 to 5 years to get it developed. And by then we have a shortage again, and then we all argue about what land should be brought in. So that is an ongoing challenge. And Dr. Bishop and Lorelei, if either of you have any input on any of these questions, I don't know how familiar you are with Central Oregon, but certainly the overview. How do vacation rental and second home buyers factor into the first-time home buyers' ability to enter the market?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it is.
I think for the most part, vacation rental and second time or second home buyers are coming into the market far more capitalized than a first time home buyer. So they're often looking in the same price point, that kind of entry level price point. Sometimes they're coming in with partnerships. So again, being well capitalized puts them in a much better position for them to compete with either cash or a well capitalized offer. They can often react quicker. So I think that would have a significant impact on first-time home buyers.
They're at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd just like to add that one of the things that we've done for a number of years is we've conducted a survey where we asked recent home buyers, what was the purpose of your home purchase, or how do you plan on using your home? And about 2/3 of the people we survey say it's going to be my primary residence, kind of the typical idea we have of why someone purchases a home. The remainder is what we define as an investment property, meaning a residential property someone buys primarily to rent out to others or for financial purposes. And about 20% is a vacation home, used primarily for their own personal or their own family's use. Now, it doesn't mean they can't rent it out and something like that. So there is a little grayness there in terms of what's an investment versus what's a vacation property. But we've consistently found, just building on your point, that certainly those buyers who buy it for the purpose of an investment, 2/3 or more are all cash deals. And for vacation, it's a little less, but it's certainly above what it is for the typical home purchase. And so there's no doubt a lot of competition, especially in those markets that are attractive to vacation home buyers. It's one more hurdle that first-time buyers have to face if they want to think about purchasing a home when they're competing with either investment or vacation home buyers.
Awesome, thank you guys. What do you see happening to bring more skilled labor to the area, knowing there will be an even greater demand once the land in the UGB expansion becomes available to build? There is a shortage of labor, no question about it. Maybe somebody from EDCO could speak to me. What are we doing to bring more skilled labor to the area? Anybody have any insight into that? I know I don't.
Well, for years we have been advertising in other markets. I think when oil prices dipped below $50 or $45 a barrel, some folks became available in North Dakota and South Dakota who had left here to go to those jobs when shale oil became much more economically beneficial to them. So we tried to get some of those folks back. Some folks don't want to get back, in the business. One other thing that I've noticed is we have contractors and trade partners who have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. And when they went through the downturn right beforehand, they had multiple crews, they had lots of vans, they had, they were managing their business well, but they had grown quite a bit. And then when it cratered, they became much more cautious with how they grow their business. So we have some terrific trade partners who say, I'm happy with one crew, maybe two, not 30, not statewide, not, and so I think there's a level of caution that is probably good for the market in some respects, but there's also parts of it where it makes it really difficult. But I think getting people back here will help. It has come back a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely some more. I call it the great humbling. I feel like we were all really humbled through that downturn where we all kind of overreached with what we were spending and the toys we were buying and the things we were doing, and we've all been kind of reining back in again. But we definitely, I know wages are up in Bend, and being married to a contractor, I know that it is really hard to find any help right now because the competition is so stiff.
And I can add just a little bit of statewide perspective on that. In the other markets where we work, this is a consistent challenge. Portland is struggling with this, Eugene is struggling with this, and it is that employment has not recovered in the trades since the Great Recession. People went off and found other things to do and have not gravitated back, and ultimately it's going to require job training and mentorship to help to bring new people into the skilled trades, which does become an economic development question. So you were right to go straight to EDCO on that one.
I know those guys know what they're doing to bring the right people here. So what can the city of Bend do to make it easier to build affordable housing or to incentivize builders and developers to build affordable housing within the city limits? Anybody able to speak to that? What can the city of Bend do to make it easier to build affordable housing? I'm not sure the city can control that. I mean, I kind of heard Dr. Bishop saying repeatedly through your presentation that there aren't a lot of policy changes that are going to change the reality of what the market is right now.
Right, I mean, all of those factors that we've mentioned here and that I mentioned earlier, there may be some things that can be done around the margins perhaps, but in terms of the ability to really transform the availability of affordable housing, there may be wiser minds out there who have some ideas. I personally don't know what it is.
Well, one thing to keep in mind with affordable housing is that that's a term that actually means a lot of different things. And in this context this morning, we've mostly been talking about affordable home ownership and sort of mid-market housing. But when you're talking about truly subsidized affordable housing that would be available to people at the lowest end of the income spectrum, that's almost always public dollars. And so that is one thing that the City of Bend with its partners who build affordable housing here in the region could be doing. And by building that housing that's available for the folks at the lowest end of the spectrum, it actually frees up units that could be available for market rate. And any affordable housing strategy has to cover the full range of income spectrum, and there are a set of incentives that could work for mid-market housing, but it's incomplete unless it's really covering the lower end as well, because the whole market has to function to allow there to be that sort of flow through the market that allows housing to be available for people at the right price point.
I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about affordable housing, but really in the last couple of years, I do feel like there's a big movement towards making that a reality, at least here in Central Oregon. At what point does Dr. Bishop think increasing interest rates combined with home appreciation will slow demand nationally?
I think we're seeing a little bit of that already. As I mentioned, we released existing home sales for January yesterday, and on a month-to-month basis, again, that's one data point, home sales fell by almost 5%. And again, it was a combination of lack of inventory, which can translate very easily into affordability. If the home and your price point just isn't there, you're not going to be a home buyer. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of that, and we've seen that over the last couple of years in terms of where we might expect existing home sales to be versus where they're at. In terms of the interest rate component of that, we're at something over 4% on the 30-year fixed rate at this point. That's maybe an attention-grabbing change, given the speed that we've seen over the last few weeks in terms of mortgage rates. But in terms of actually having a significant impact on affordability, I think there's a little ways to go. If you do the calculation, and I've done this for various price points, the increase in the mortgage payment on a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage for a 50 or even 100 basis point increase in mortgage rates, for all but the highest price points, we're talking some increase in the monthly mortgage payment, but at this point, it's not significant enough that I think it would keep a lot of people out of the market simply because of the financing cost. I think it's more the availability and inventory that's driving up the affordability is going to limit the ability of first-time buyers and those buyers at the lower price points in any community to really be able to complete a transaction.
So true. For Lorelei, what is the biggest takeaway from Echo Northwest data from the report?
First of all, I should give extra points to whoever wrote this for spelling my name right. Good job on that. I hate to be redundant, but it really is just that the market is very strong, and it's strong across the entire 3-county area. You're seeing some of the trends that have been emphasized here in this discussion of housing market strength spreading out of Bend into the outer areas and sort of price pressure increasing across all of the submarkets. It's a strong market, it's tight, and there's no real indication in what we have looked at least as far as the trends for the real estate component goes, that would suggest that that would change because of the amount of immigration that's occurring. So it's a little bit of I guess less than exciting takeaway that everything looks like it's just sort of steady sailing going forward with similar trends to what we've seen in the past. And just one more point, it's actually CORE's data. So hooray for them for sharing it.
That's awesome. And that report, by the way, is available now in Rapatoni. So it is something that's available to all of you. Are there any questions from the audience? I have a hand over here. I don't know who has the mics. I might be able to hear you and repeat it.
So infrastructure costs as related to the UGB expansion, especially southeast, where there's no sewer, water, all that sort of thing, or people have water but it's accepted. And it's my understanding that the Fed used to reimburse for infrastructure when you put it in, when the water and sewer thing has to happen. How long do you guys think it's going to take, 5 years, 10 years, before that's going to become available, the infrastructure down there?
So Kathy's question is, how long do we think it's going to take for that land in Southeast Bend specifically that was brought into the UGB to actually be developed? You know, we've got septic systems and no water down there, so how long is that going to take? What's realistic? Come on, you development heads.
I think it really depends on the area in Bend that you're focused on. I think certain areas, the city, and I'm not obviously speaking on behalf of the city, but I think there's a focus to bring city services into certain areas sooner. And it's really focusing on those areas that probably have the highest demand, where there's kind of an immediate return back to the city for that investment up front. So I think it really is on a case-by-case basis.
Sounds realistic, Bill and Jeff. Since new construction, how long does it take? You know, you buy a piece of land that's got no services to it. What's that timeline look like?
Well, I think we're looking at over a year for stuff that does have services to the boundaries. And so, my immediate sort of off the top of my head thought is, 3 to 5 years for something where we've got to coordinate a lot of services off-site to get services to the site. The sewer on 27th Street is really deep. I don't know if you saw the holes when it was open, but it's really deep. So I can't imagine how expensive that was.
I'll just second Bill's point. I know the city is actively working on those questions right now and trying to identify where it makes the most sense to start and how that land can come unstuck through infrastructure development in the most rapid way possible. But it's complicated and it does take some time. So I don't know the answer to the question you asked specifically, but I know there's movement to head that direction.
So we're all kind of seeing this 3 to 5 year timeline hovering out there, just depending. Is it even feasible at this time for builders to focus on affordable housing and still run a thriving business? What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I'm despite my numbers that I threw out earlier, I'm very optimistic that we can continue to find creative ways to finance land, to buy it well, to procure at a large, level. We partner very well. Central Oregon Builders Association, our government affairs committee works really closely with all the cities in Central Oregon to make sure that we have a good dialogue, because the need for housing is something we all agree on. How we get there is the interesting, fun job we work on. But I think it's not only useful, but it's absolutely necessary that we continue to fight this for the sake of our community.
Right, everybody wants to own a home. We got to be able to afford it to do that. Do you think that lease rates are rising on par with values and sale prices for commercial real estate? Jay, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think there's a direct correlation between what lease rates are, if you're buying an investment property, what lease rates are and what the overall value of the property is. I think what we're seeing, because of how tight the market is brokers will take a look at the rent roll for a property and they'll say, okay, well, here are the lease rates currently, but within the next 6 months or within the next 12 months, this lease bumps up to this rate, and this lease bumps up to that rate, or this lease roll expires and you can bump it to market at that point in time. So a little bit of underwriting on a pro forma basis. So the actual cap rate is, say, 4.5%, but within the next 12 months, you kind of tell the story of how you can get to a 6% or a 6.5%. So again, not everyone is interested in buying that story, but with how much demand that there is in the market, someone's going to. There's just so much pressure, especially on a 1031 exchange perspective, or from a 1031 exchange standpoint, that these people are faced with paying significant capital gains tax or buying something and feeling like they're maybe slightly overpaying for it, and they're going to slightly overpay for it 9 times out of 10. So I think to a certain extent, yes, they're keeping pace, but the values are maybe a little bit outpacing where lease rates are currently.
And I think that's such an interesting question, and Molly, I'm wondering if you can speak to on the residential side. We certainly are seeing rents go up there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that, in that in certain sectors, rents are increasing so much that people are looking at, is it smarter to buy? It puts them in those, often in the below median sales price, so it remains competitive. But the other thing that we're seeing from families that are renting is their owners of their property are deciding to capitalize on their equity, and they get a notice to say, hey, here's your notice to move. So they're having to move every year, and that's not a fun way to raise kids, try and stay in the same school district.
So many it's so interesting to me to hear that you just start thinking, okay, but now we're talking about schools and land development and commercial and rents and demand. It's just crazy. How many families with school-age children are moving to Bend, and how do the state of our schools play into families' decisions to move to Central Oregon? Molly, what are you hearing?
Well, obviously we see a lot of families moving here. They want to raise their kids here. They want to come here for the balanced lifestyle and all that it has to offer families. So I'd say that's a large percentage. I don't know exactly the percentage of families moving to Bend. And I would say, aside of price alone, the schools that the kids are going to dictates where we're looking for houses. I'd say it's in the top 2 or 3 bucket list items.
Definitely. And we have great schools.
Absolutely. And that's what we tell clients too, is that there's no bad school here. They get online and they look at the school report cards, but we're able to talk to them about the parent involvement in each school. We have tag programs on the east side of school with west side kids being bused over there. We have a great system of magnet schools that they can go to, that they don't have to live in district. We've got a good selection of private schools also. So there's no bad options, which is great to say when we're talking to our clients.
Dr. Bishop, are there areas of the U.S. that the market and trends are in a downturn as compared to Central Oregon?
Yeah, there are certainly areas that are struggling, or certainly not growing nearly as fast even as what we see looking at the national numbers. And in terms of how it affects the housing market, the way I like to look at it is, what is the pattern of people moving into the area? We discussed that a little earlier. As I mentioned, there are communities where they're actually experiencing population declines, and even whole states that on average are experiencing population declines. So that certainly not going to support the housing market in any meaningful way on a long-term basis if the population of people in that state or in that community is flat or declining. And the other component of that is just what the job and income picture looks like. There are communities in different parts of the country that are struggling. Again, it may not mean that they're necessarily in a recession or an actual downturn, but there are certainly areas that are struggling in terms of still relatively high unemployment rates and sluggish wage gains. All of those factors are going to make it more challenging for those folks in that community to buy their first home or to buy another home. And certainly it's not particularly attractive for someone from outside the community to come in there. And all of that, again, feeds on itself in the sense of being attractive place where builders and others want to relocate and kind of give that community the vibrancy that might improve its prospects over the long term.
Thank you. So how about final thoughts? I think I'll just go around the room. And
Lorelai, what can make me go first?
Yeah. In closing, what would you like to say?
Well, I am looking forward to having the opportunity to continue to track market trends, so that when I come in front of you next time, I will have more to say about what it might look like going forward. We're new to playing around with the data, and the trends are they're steady and strong, as I have said, but putting together a price index that can help us have really a better pulse on what's going on will be really helpful, and I'm looking forward to that. I feel that affordability is probably the largest challenge from both an economic development and a housing perspective that the city of Bend faces, and that's not unique. That's the same situation that we're running into in almost all of the communities where we're working. And that really does require, it's a systemic problem that requires a systemic response. And there's no one individual or one group of individuals who can really solve or relieve that problem. So I'm happy to see the degree of emphasis on that because it will require all of our collective brain power to figure out a response to it.
Awesome, thank you, Lorelei. Dr. Bishop.
I'd say one of the maybe takeaways from our discussion here is that in fact we often think of real estate markets as kind of a market, a geographic market, whether you're talking about a municipality or a collection of counties, whatever the case may be. But I think in our discussion here, one of the things that's come out is that this community is tied to the fortunes and prospects and what's going on, not just other communities locally, but all across the western part of the country, Los Angeles, other parts of the Northwest, because if their economies, say, just use Los Angeles as an example, and the tech boom continues to move forward as fast as it has over the last several months, that's going to make the affordability challenge there even more difficult than it is, and that's going to have perhaps some implication for those households or businesses that want to move, say, to the Bend area where things look relatively more affordable. And so the fortunes of this community are tied to the fortunes of other communities who have viewed in the past Bend as an attractive place to do business or to move to. So it isn't just what's going on locally, as important as that is, it's what's going on with all of those other communities that are connected as well.
So true. Thank you. Jeff.
I think the question earlier about what could the city of Bend do, with regard to affordable housing, I think it's a great question, and it's tempting for all of us to say, to the government, what are you going to do to help us with the affordable housing thing? But I think the reality is that we're not going to get free land, we're not going to get free permits from the city, we're not going to get free commissions, we're not going to get free labor and materials. And so solving the problem, I think, is we're going to have to leverage that collaborative business environment that we all know to be true here, and figure out how to take advantage of it. The question is, are we willing to do it while the economy is strong? Or are we going to wait for the economy to tell us we have to lower our prices when it changes? And that's a hard conversation to have because we have a lot of forces pushing on us on cost. But I think that's the environment that the public-private partnership effort to figure out how to keep some housing in the middle of the market will make a big difference, and it will be a unique identifier for us when we solve it.
Thank you, Jeff. Jay.
From a leasing and sales standpoint, I think it's just a matter of setting expectations appropriately on where the market is currently, and understanding that we're in a rising price or rising rate environment, and for those companies that are renewing their leases or looking to find new office space, maybe it's doing more with less if you have a limited budget. Putting multiple people into offices or relocating to a different part of town that's maybe not as desirable, and I know that's not attractive to everybody, but it's just a function of where we are and how limited the inventory is right now, and just being realistic about what the options are that are out there for you. From a buying standpoint, again, it's just it's so competitive out there that you have to understand that multiple offers are going to come in on properties that are attractive because there's so much capital chasing deals right now, both locally and coming from outside the area as well.
Here we hear that outside the area impacting us again. So thank you, Jay. Bill?
I think to Jay's point, one of the concerns that I have is we've done such a great job of promoting Bend in particular in Central Oregon is a great way or a great area to grow and start new businesses. And I'm a little concerned about the affordability factor and whether or not we're going to be able to nurture these businesses, actually to be able to grow in place. And so that's a little bit of a concern going forward, is just kind of our affordability factor on the business side of things and what impact that might have overall on job creation. And so it's just, I believe, something to be aware of.
Thank you very much. Molly?
Yeah, well, it's no secret that small town Bend is now on everybody's radar, and I think we're going to continue to be the mecca that everybody is going to want to flood to, and I think that's going to set us up for a really great year in the residential sector, as long as we all stay really collaborative and have open communication with other brokers outside the area, talk to each other, figure out how we can set both buyers and sellers up for success, because we can make it happen. And I think we're going to have a great year if we can all do that.
Thank you, Molly. So you've gotten to hear some really wise people talk about what's going on in the market and what we think is going to happen in the market, if only we had a crystal ball. What I will say is a very wise man once told me that part of the draw to Bend is because all of us love living here. And it's evident in everything we do and everywhere we go, right? When you go drive to work and see people out running along the trails or throwing frisbees for their dogs in the dog parks. Go to any concert, every venue is packed. If you want to go out to dinner on a Saturday night in Bend, you better make reservations, because we're such an engaged, lively community in love with where we live. And that is contagious. So people may see these great #1 on this list and this list and this list reports, but when they come here and visit, that's when they buy in, right? It's because of all of you and what you're adding to the community by your passion for living here. And just hearing the people on this panel talk about how we want to collaborate, how we want to do things right, that's what makes Central Oregon attractive, in my opinion. So I want to remind everybody before you go that the shuttles will be running from 10:30 to 11:30, so there's no big rush to run out the door. Sit and visit. Talk to each other about what you see. This is part of what makes Central Oregon so great. What did you get? Share your ahas. And thank you all for coming in today. Oh, and put your card in the jar over by the juice. Yes, for the drawing with Bobby Williamson. You got it.
Yeah. Yeah, but that pilot program does. Yeah. Why does that not surprise me?
I know. I would have to find, put it into the pilot program.